everybody. I'm Weston LaBar. Welcome to another episode of On the Waterfront, sponsored by Waterfront Logistics. I'm joined today by Carl Bentzel. Carl's been a friend, former FMC commissioner. He's been very active in policy around goods movement and supply chain for a very long time. And now he is the president of the National Association of Waterfront Employers. Carl, thank you for joining us. And how are you doing today?
Hey, Weston, nice to see you again. It's always a pleasure. And so I'm looking forward to talking about the issues. And things are going pretty good in Washington, D.C., except this is probably the most active period of any administration that I've dealt with in my six plus administration. Administrations that have been serving as presidency have been in my time.
Yeah, active is a word, unpredictable is a word, but speaking of active, you just came off your term with the Federal Maritime Commission. I think most would argue one of the most active periods of time for the Federal Maritime Commission, especially in recent memory. Can you talk a little bit about your experience at the FMC and your takeaways from your time there?
Sure, sure. So I've been working in Washington for close to 35 years on maritime policy issues, House and Senate, and then worked in the private sector representing all trucking interests and shipping interests, and so been engaged for a long time. Was given an opportunity by President Trump to fill a Democratic commissioner slot at the FMC, and I went through the process, which was much more onerous than you would think, and intrusive. But I had a great opportunity at the commission and have had outstanding colleagues, and I think you're accurate in characterizing it as the most activist. A group of commissioners to consider issues affecting shipping, potentially in the history of the agency, which goes back to 1916 in some form. So it was really a fantastic experience. I actually was going through the process of doing another term and had done the hearing and then decided that the offer that was provided to me by the National Association of Waterfront Employers was just too good an opportunity to not go back on the other side. So it was a great time. There was a lot of issues. I think the single most driving issue affecting what happened at the commission was the pandemic and the congestion in shipping.
Absolutely. Congestion and shipping, I think, is why the FMC started to become such a popular outlet because there were so many different parties that had different perspectives of what a good supply chain looks like. It's so codependent, but a lot of times you're working with folks that are not your vendor or your customer, but you have to have a relationship with, think truckers and terminals, truckers and ocean carriers. And you guys did a lot. I got a distinct pleasure of working very closely with you and your colleagues when I was the CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association, and then as a volunteer board member with both the Intermodal Carriers Conference and the HTA following that. But I mean, you think about it, you guys worked collaboratively to go out and you created an interpretive rule that led to the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, that biggest piece of supply chain and maritime legislation in decades, right? You personally led all the initiatives around data and data quality and how do we get the right type of data in the maritime industry to have a smarter and less congested supply chain. So with all the different things, and I could go on and on, but those are some of the highlights. What are you most proud of? Because you guys, like I said, a laundry list of accomplishments, really coming out of a time when many people would have said 10 years prior, well, the FMC is just a figurehead position and they don't do anything. And you guys didn't get that message, I guess.
I think the most singular important thing that occurred during my my tenure as a commissioner was recognition of the economic value and the importance of the entire industry. And you're right, it's an ecosystem that includes ocean carriers and terminals and warehousing services and trucking services and the intermodal railroads and the BCOs and the forwarders, and they all connect everything that moves in this nation, and people do not understand how dependent as a nation we are on that movement of freight through our gateways. And I started to get it. I thought I'd be playing golf on Friday, maybe even, warm up a little on Monday mornings, but I never had that opportunity because there was so much going on. And that's because instead of having logistics managers coming in to meet with me to talk about frustration on getting chassis or issues with the gates at a particular terminal, I was having CEOs of companies coming in telling me that they were losing 10 to 15% of their business opportunities because they weren't getting what they needed. So I think the most important thing that occurred was a recognition of our dependence on the supply chain. And I include every aspect of it. If you can't get wheels, you can't move from a terminal. If you don't have ships because they're backed up and they're not moving, you can't move cargo through terminals because you're not getting it. If the railroads are slow on the West Coast, there will be issues in the interior. So I think that was the single most important thing that occurred during my tenure. I am most proud of working on data and assessing the adequacy of data. The issue of the adequacy of data is still a huge pressing issue. It's not that we don't have data, it's that the shipping public is not receiving the best and most current up-to-date data. And so I made recommendations to require the transmittal of information that was real-time information related to servicing U.S. ports, including estimated arrivals, harmonizing the system of describing cargo through ports, and working at the collaborative information that's necessary, because you need to have information on warehouse services and trucking services and chassis, the availability of chassis together with all of those other services. So that is still outstanding. I hope the industry pushes the commission to consider my recommendations. I think they still are incredibly valid, and I think we'll see a need for them in the coming months with the trade dislocation that will occur and will result in some of those same challenges that we had during the pandemic.
Yeah, and the work you've done on data, I think, it needs to be put into a little bit more focus because, even when I started in this industry, 10, 15 years ago, nobody even wanted to talk about data. And then a lot of people want to talk about how important data is, but not really understanding how they want to use it or the value of data. And let's be honest, the industry has very much been trying to solve for yesterday as opposed to prepare for tomorrow. And what data allows us to do is take a look at things more holistically, look at the triggers and the key indicators that say, if this happens, then that might happen. And we're at the precipice of this new age of digital tools and artificial intelligence, but it comes down to one big thing. Do you have the right data to be able to prepare yourself for what's to come tomorrow? And the work that you've done at the FMC really helped not just lay the groundwork, but I think bring folks out of their silos, come together and have a more industry focused approach to data as opposed to siloed company by company approach to it. Because again, we're so interconnected. If I optimize for myself, but I don't know what all of my partners, either direct or indirect, are doing, I'm still not 100% sure what I'm going to be able to do.
Right. So intentionally, I made decisions and recommendations to endorse no system of delivery of information, but to focus on the quality of information provided to those people that are there. Everyone has the capacity right now to use APIs to scrape data and get data into their own format and be able to utilize it. the issue really is the quality of the underlying data. If you get garbage information that you use for your reporting, or information that hasn't been updated in 3 weeks, or information that is not descriptive enough to tell you what to do, it doesn't matter how good your technology is, because
Mhm.
it's going to fail because the data, underlying data. And so that's what the recommendations essentially were aimed at addressing: the quality of data, the timeliness of data, and then allow the industry to come up with their own way to utilize that information to be more efficient and productive.
Yeah, and now you've been able to use all that of that experience and a lot of these like I said, massive lifts to get the industry moving in the right direction. And you say, I think I can go help an organization because now I've got some of the groundwork laid, some of the tools have been created. Let's roll up our sleeves and see what we can do. Talk about now what you're doing and what the National Association of Waterfront Employers, NAWE, is doing to take it to the next step, right? Because now you're in the middle of it. You're working with the
Right.
employers, you're working with the folks really moving the freight ground level. So talk about first the opportunity and give our listeners and watchers a little bit of understanding of what Nawe does and who they represent, but some of your initiatives moving forward, because I know they hired you for a reason.
Sure, they did. Yeah, no, in part to elevate the discourse and our ability to take a lead role on policy issues, and policy issues are coming fast and furiously right now. But NOWE is an association that represents waterfront employers that are marine terminals that are in the business of moving cargo. Our members handle about over 90% of the containerized trade in the United States. So, most all of the terminals on the West Coast, for instance, most all of the terminals on the East Coast. We also have members that are port authorities, that are operating port authorities, such as Houston, Virginia, and Georgia ports authorities as members. So it's the vast majority of our international trade, containerized international trade. There's a substantial portion of break bulk and bulk cargo shipping done through NAWE membership. We have associate members. We have members, for instance, the PMA is a member, so the collective bargaining agencies that administer the contracts for employment on the West Coast and the East Coast and the Gulf Coast are all members, and we have a number of associate members, chassis companies, equipment providers, OEMs. So right now we have over 50 members, but we're primarily considering issues affecting the interface between the terminal, marine terminal environment. So the actions between our customers, the ocean carriers, and the service providers that we all use to move cargo through the system, trucking companies, NVOCCs, railroads, and warehousing, and the BCOs themselves. So the association's objectives are to foster a way to accommodate the trade growth that continues to go. Most of our terminals are located in large urban areas where the opportunity for growth is limited, because most of these places were ports before they were towns, before they were cities, before they were urban areas, and before they were urban sprawl. And so getting an opportunity to be able to expand, to accomplish what we need to in the future, will be challenging. So on the West Coast, out where you are, we face challenges with environmental requirements on emissions and how to achieve reductions in emissions while achieving an ability to replace our equipment and to continue to operate with the volumes of trade that continues to tick up. On the East Coast, we have similar challenges, how to develop better intermodal railroads and services that could get things further in. Can we use port areas that are less less densely packed. The fastest growing port in the United States has been Mobile, Alabama, on a per capita basis. That's no mistake. Now, it's still relatively small, but it's because it's a lot easier to get cargo through certain areas. So these are all challenges that the industry faces. And then I think the biggest is the president's trade policies and position, uh, which we support, to grow back the maritime industrial base in the United States.
Yeah, the first comment you made about being in urban areas, it's so funny because when we think about it, people follow jobs, jobs follow infrastructure, especially when you're talking about 100 years ago to today, when a lot of these ports were in their infancies. You're talking about early 1900s, right? And they've built up over time based on the needs and the trade lanes, but also the jobs they've created and the people who have not just grown up but moved to those communities. Now you're at a situation where you're trying to be both run a productive business, but also be a good corporate citizen, and you've got the same people working and living there. So it always is interesting to me, moving from Pennsylvania to California in the early 2010s and seeing all of this opportunity, all this commerce, great paying jobs, and so many people so upset about the things that are creating the opportunities. So your members are the ones out there creating the jobs and providing the opportunities, and now they've no good deed goes unpunished. So now they've got the added responsibility of helping create better communities, not just to work in, but to live in. And I got to say, the work that's been done, especially my experience by the ports on the West Coast, and you look at the Southern California, San Pedro Bay ports, LA, Long Beach. I mean, the air is at 99% cleaner than it was at 10 years ago and 20 years ago. So I gotta say, they're doing something right. As they're moving more cargo, they're doing it much cleaner, and that's a big shout out to your membership. So,
Yeah, no, no.
um,
They have, you traditionally, all we really want to do, if you ask a MTO what their desire is to take cargo off a ship and get it to a truck and get it out as fast as possible and handle as much as possible. But that's not viable any longer. So we can't. There's just too much growth and volume. That LA Long Beach complex is just stunning. If people saw the miles of containers lined up and the orchestration necessary to move that cargo input through, they would be stunned that we could achieve what we've achieved. And so there's still going to be pressure, but it makes the terminals consider things. They have sustainability people in their corporate structure where 15, 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't even think about that.
Yeah, I like to drive through the ports. I get to do it every day. My office is 3 miles from the port of LA Long Beach, and I like to say a busy port's a good thing. It means economic growth. It means jobs. It means good things are happening, right? If the port's slow, if you don't see containers, we've got other things to worry about, right? Because that's a key indicator of an economic downturn. The fun little thing is if you're not buying stuff, then the ports aren't going to be busy. But if you are, and there's people are building things and traveling places, and people need all of these goods and resources, you're going to see a lot of containers. You're going to see a lot of job creation, and these are really good paying jobs, right? Logistics is the new manufacturing, and that's something we all have to keep in mind. But you brought up the magic word, trade war, and trade policy, and so there's a lot of different things that impact your members. Everything from the tariffs and what countries will they be on, what countries won't they be on, what products will they be on, what products won't they be on, will they, what will the retaliatory effect be? That's one bucket of it. You've got the continued dialogue around port fees for Chinese built vessels. Obviously, that has to be a big policy of concern, making sure it's done the right way. Otherwise, As I've said, if you have a port fee every time there's a vessel call, they'll just reduce the number of calls in a vessel string, right? And that
Mhm.
means that certain ports will see growth and certain ports will see congestion because maybe they weren't meant to handle 100% of a ship being discharged, because these will be bigger vessels, obviously, to carry that volume and have less vessel calls. But you also then will see smaller ports that will maybe go away, especially export driven ports may cease to exist. And they'll say, hey, you don't need to go to Oakland because we're not sending a vessel there. We're sending it to Los Angeles and Long Beach. Figure out how to get your products overseas there. And there's been so many jobs and infrastructure created around these markets. Talk a bit about some of the different things that your members are looking at, the concerns, but also I think that in general, I think a lot of the industry's done a good job educating the administration on the pros, but also the cons, especially in the short term, of what could happen if this isn't really thought through. And we've seen at least an openness and an appetite by the administration to rethink some of the more concerning policies, like what happens if you charge millions of dollars every time a Chinese built ship, which is 90% of the ships in the world, shows up at your port.
Yeah. So it's been since I've been here, which was I left December. I've been here a couple of months. I actually worked with the association way back when I was in the private sector, so I knew what they did and what they were working on. But I've been at the White House, I think, 5 times since then, and there is a plaque in the White House that call is for the maritime industrial base redevelopment, and it's a whole system within the White House working on policies. Have issued an executive order that the president issued that is a declaration of intent on how this administration will go forward. The intent is to rebuild the U.S. maritime industrial base and to remedy challenges that have been created as a result of China's domination and government impelled planning to support Chinese domination in shipbuilding and maritime logistics and shipping, and so we've been dealing with that, and my association, our members want to have trade. That's a fund. That's how they make their money. So they are like you. They want to have a busy port. The best port is a 50-50 port. Is that half the cargo comes in on imports and half of it goes out on exports. It's much easier to manage, and if you have a full terminal that's carrying all the imports and exports that you can manage, that's the best. And so, concerned, of course, with any increases on anything that would slow terminals like tariffs, and so that's just a general. It's my opinion that the White House has said what they're going to say on that, and so advocating on it has limited value from my perspective. We're dealing with anything that the president and the administration wants to impose directly on the maritime industry and considering those issues. So I did testify at USTR. We made recommendations. So you talked about we had four recommendations on the penalties on Chinese shipping and shipbuilding, and you're right. It's a substantial amount of cargo. That it should be based on a per voyage assessment as opposed to a per visit assessment to avoid a situation where too much cargo is coming into these big ports and hurting other ports. I think it would have two impacts. It would hurt the smaller port and potentially exports, but also probably create too much congestion to handle appropriately the levels of commerce that would be driven to the big ports. We asked for strong diversion language so that this wouldn't create an incentive to use Canadian or Mexican ports and then truck it over the borders. So we asked that harbor maintenance tax penalties that are imposed at U.S. ports and any penalties on Chinese shipping be assessed at land bridge cargoes equally, to ensure that this didn't create just a giant sucking sound to the north or south. Uh,
Yeah.
we asked for exemptions in certain commodity specific markets, bulk markets, break bulk markets, and smaller container shipping fleets that couldn't sustain the volume, the amount of the penalty, and we also asked that if you're going to put this funding, charge this funding, it should be used to redeploy for the benefit of the shipbuilding, the maritime industrial base. My members, we should get some help to get new equipment and to purchase compliant trade equipment with respect to cargo handling, and so there should be a commitment to reinvest that and help us transition. There was, in addition to the penalties on Chinese ships and Chinese built and Chinese shipping, there was penalties on cargo handling equipment, containers. Not too many people have recognized that there's now going to be a proposal for 100% increase on penalties on containers, and cargo handling technology, ship to shore cranes in particular, would be subject to 100% duty. So we are working closely with the White House on ensuring that any of our ship to shore equipment that was under process gets protected coming in. They shouldn't be penalized for orders that occurred 2 years ago. And then we're going to work with the STS and cargo handling industry to get something that will allow us to help transition. In my view, there's going to have to be some assistance to rebuild a market that hasn't existed. The last time a container ship to shore crane was manufactured in the United States was in the late 1980s. So,
Yeah. I mean, you don't need to look too far back for an example of how not to handle it. I remember being part of the expert witness committee when chassis were at the center of tariffs and the anti-duty dumping. And one of the big things that we tried to push home is while we appreciate the movement of manufacturing to the US, there needs to be a phased in approach. There needs to be a common sense outlook. Otherwise, you're going to have a supply chain meltdown because not only are 60,000 chassis at that time of new build out of probably 80,000 were made in China, mostly by one manufacturer, but also they made all the componentry that all the domestic manufacturers used.
yeah,
And guess what? They didn't realize they were going to be subject to all those tariffs. They didn't have the opportunity to build up their workforce. They didn't have the ability to keep up with the demand. And then we had all the COVID related issues where chassis became part of warehouse on wheels equations, and exactly what we all said was going to happen happened. We had a supply chain meltdown mostly due to the inability to quickly get chassis into the system. And then by the time all the chassis were being manufactured,
Yeah.
we were on the back end of it. Now you drive around and there's chassis stacked everywhere. And so those jobs went away as quick as they showed up. And I think that's the big thing we got to look at is it's got to be common sense. It's got to be phased in. Otherwise, we're just going to be having deep penalties that are going to cut into the ability of consumers to buy the products because every time there's an additional operational cost, you can only absorb so much of it, right? And I think that's what we're all looking at is how can we all continue to be good American businesses and employ American people and get
yeah,
goods to market at an affordable, efficient manner. Um, and unfortunately, we've since the early 90s have been creating this global free trade approach to things, which you can't undo overnight. So, I mean, that to your point, you said the advocacy part of it is difficult because they've already kind of made their mind up. But at the same time, it seems that they are willing to learn some of the nuance, at least, and
yeah.
have a more common sense approach this time around.
So, yeah, I mean, there's every time you engage in sort of an action that changes economic patterns, there's going to be incredible challenges, especially in the maritime environment, because we are so big. We really, but I will say, at the same time, we were having problems with chassis because there was a trade embargo. Tariffs were being imposed on chassis. The Chinese had curtailed the production of the manufacturing of containers on the other side. And there's only three companies that were, and they were all Chinese, and they'd essentially stopped production in order to increase prices, and they controlled the market. And so that also, so that gives you an idea of what they were worried about on the other side of the equation. But so yes, I read the report with respect to the Chinese actions, and there's no mistakes. They outline a case that has been taken by the Chinese government to control a market. And so, but you're right. How do you remedy something that's built up and created a market that exists in that way? I mean, it's a huge challenge. So I've been spending more time recently looking at policies on, almost similar to shipbuilding with respect to the cargo handling equipment and how can you jumpstart this? But it's going to be a huge challenge, and without further steps and support from the administration, I don't know how it's going to happen. And
Yeah.
so for instance, you mentioned I got a call yesterday from one of our members, and they said, listen, we have millions of dollars that we spend because we purchased our cranes each year, bringing in and supplying equipment to update the equipment that we use. And if we don't put it in, that container handling device becomes less, and it's proprietary. It's their own equipment. So what do we do? Are we going to stop trying to buy replacement equipment that needs to be replaced because of safety and wear and tear? So there's a lot of issues. But I do believe that the White House is willing to consider some of these issues as we go through the process. And so we're hopeful that we can mitigate some of the impacts. And I will tell you, the transportation industry probably doesn't get paid what they should get paid for the services that they do. I looked at the amount of GDP attributable to transportation and products, and sometimes it's as low as 2% or 1%. It's not. A pair of Levi's jeans that are being marketed for $100 a pair are probably, I couldn't probably even quantify in any viable way what their cost of transportation was as a part of that end product. So there's a little room for growth and cost in some of the commodity areas. In others, there will be challenges, and it could have impacts on consumers. Usually has impact on consumers no matter what.
Yeah, and I've been a big drum beater as you and so many others have. Transportation, supply chain, logistics. It's a high value service, not a low price commodity. If all you want to do is drive rates down, you're going to drive down service levels, and we can all we can win in the form of healthier companies, higher paid workers, but at the same time lower cost to serve by being more efficient. And that only happens by being looked at as a service provider who can invest in technology, equipment, all these other things that make us better providers, as opposed to how do we have to cut costs to have the most bare bottom competitive rate to continue to keep our lights on, right? And that's been the age old question since deregulation in
Yeah,
1980.
yeah,
And I think that there's been a lot of positives that have come from that, the anti-inflationary results of it. But now we've got to take a look at where does the supply chain industry need to be 10 years from now? And we need to stop looking at it as, well, I think that somebody will do this for, uh, you know,
right,
2002 rates,
right.
right? Because it's a different game. You
It
know,
is.
uh, Great segue though into our final segment here, which is about what do we see moving forward? Obviously, you're in DC. A lot of us get our news either through traditional media or more and more through memes on social media as to what's going on in Washington DC. But Nonetheless, you're right in the middle of all of it. As you said, you've been over to the White House and met with the president and the administration multiple times, and I think there's a lot of school of thoughts. There's been a lot of front loading in the industry, which means we've all had really positive, trailing 4 quarters. There's a lot of unknowns in the outlooks moving forward. We sit here on 85 acres, 3 miles from the port, and we're extremely busy with certain things like steel and bulk commodities and energy products, but definitely have seen a drop in the container volume for retail goods and for especially a lot of the discount retail goods. Um, what are you guys seeing? What are your members seeing? Because right now we're in the midst of 80 plus blank sailings as of today.
Yeah, no, I it's a concern. So it's been pretty good year. It hadn't been like the pandemics, but pretty good years, and there's been some front loading, and we see a huge cliff of blank sailings, and so I my members are looking at that with concern. Some of it is not approaching certain trades. So, like Japan, other countries that are not subject to the highest level of tariffs will see less. They may actually see some more. One thing that I would say is it's all about supply and demand. If people still want to buy things, and the market starts to get tight, someone will try to get cargo in there to take advantage of those prices on the BCO side. So in some respects, they might be a little bit too reactive to the tariff, and less concerned about the market, and the impact is on shipping. So my members are telling me that they're going to see a huge cliff of as a result of the blank sailings that are being ordered now, and perhaps, I don't know, some sort of mini type pandemic, because if supply is still there, I mean demand is still there, we're going to have to ramp up again, sort of like the pandemic, where we saw the reductions in manufacturing causing 20 to 30% reductions in consumer good movements, and then a reverse swing of 20 or 30% because the demand was surging again. And so I don't know if people are assessing demand in the future. They're just reacting to curtail supply because of tariffs, and that's my concern. But yes, we are seeing some of that, and some again is a little bit specific to the market. The Chinese tariffs are higher than others. So if I was speculating and I could buy from Japan and China, I might order more from China or Japan, and in anticipation that the market would be there. But whatever it is, it'll be uneven. And so I do think, although most of the people I talked to told me that things were pretty good right now, and so a lot of stuff is continuing to flow at pretty high volume. So, and I would say, to those of you that are out there, the blank sailings are authorized under shipping agreements, the three agreements that are on file at the FMC and subject to monitor by the FMC. So I'll talk to my members about what their concerns are on that, but they are authorized generally to take steps to market conditions to blank sailings. This gets back to the issues that we talked about on data. We still need to know more information about when these are being blanked and how they're being conveyed to the public. But this could be issues for exports as well, big issues for exports. So I think it's going to be a very challenging last quarter, or next quarter, to what had been a pretty good year because of the front loading and such. And I don't know if it's really at present generated because of reductions in supply.
I was just going to say, a healthy economy solves a lot of these issues where consumer demand remains high. You're still going to have a lot of commerce, a lot of activity, and obviously a lot of cargo flowing through the docks and throughout the country. I think the big question people are looking at is when does the pricing get less elastic, and when do you cross that line of demarcation where people aren't as willing to buy as many of the goods that they may have
Right.
at a previous price point, right? And I've heard the whole like, if an iPhone was $2,000 instead of $1,000, how many people would buy it? Well, the last time I checked, if you're patient, you get it for free when you renew your cell phone contract anyway. But those are the things that people are looking at, and I
Right.
think that's for businesses to continue to be able to generate revenue. They're going to figure out the ones that are going to be successful, are the ones that figure out innovative ways to continue to put their products in the hands of the American consumer. And that's really what we all have to hope for is that the American ingenuity and that entrepreneurial know-how shines through, and that no matter what happens as we go through this global shift in trade lanes and in trade policy, that American companies are doing a good job of marketing to American consumers, having pricing that an American consumer is going to be able to live with, even if it's higher than it was yesterday. And at the end of the day, keep inflation as under control as possible to have a strong consumer confidence in our economy. And I've had John Gold on here, and every time I talk to him about a report, he's like, "Well, we had a better back to school season or a better holiday
Yeah.
season than
Yeah.
anticipated, despite these things." So, I think that's where we all have to look. When is a little bit more too much? And as long as we don't get to that point, then we'll continue to have a very healthy economy.
Sometimes the economists, when they look at these things, Weston, they look at what, boy, are they accumulating debt or other things, and are they monitoring that in their purchase orders? I'll tell you, I have two teenage kids in college, and every time they come home, there's something on the front step 5 times a week. So I think the U.S. consumer has almost a Pavlovian interest in continuing to purchase items because we're used to doing it. So never discount that, and hopefully that will ruffle the edges of a trade dispute, and we can move forward and progress, and despite some of those challenges.
Well, Carl, thanks again for joining. It's always great to chat with you. Any final thoughts or words of wisdom for our listeners and viewers?
I would just emphasize how important the transportation industry is, all aspects working together, the need to continue to communicate and work in what is a incredibly complex ballet of services that are necessary to move stuff in. So I just say thank you for what you do as an industry, and I recognize it because I've been working in it, and so I believe we'll be able to overcome the temporary challenges of what's going on, and continue to be vital, economically vital to the nation. So thanks.
Thank you so much. That was Carl Bentzel, president of the National Association of Waterfront Employers, former federal maritime commissioner, and very big friend of the industry. I'm Weston LaBar. This has been another great episode of On the Waterfront, brought to you by Waterfront Logistics, where we move it like we own it. Thank you again. And until next time, have a good one.